Israel's Prime Minister, Mr. Levi Eshkol. The Six-Day War was a fateful event and an ominous threat to Israel. We didn't want the war, and we did our best to prevent it. But when it was forced on us, we were ready, in men, in training, in equipment, to meet the challenge and to fight back. We fought for our lives and for the existence of a Jewish state. We fought with our soul and our heart, knowing what was at stake. We became a nation of warriors. The nation won because of its defense forces. The defense forces won with the nation's strength. No, we didn't want the war. They wanted it. At every head of states convention, at every foreign ministers' meeting, at every conference of the Arab League, one oath was repeated. We shall annihilate Israel. One common goal united the Arab world. Egypt in the south, Syria in the north, spent fortunes on weapons, training, and terrorist warfare against Israel. All sources of power and education were aimed against Israel. They trained and sang their songs of destruction. These were the Syrians, but the long Jordanian border to the east was turbulent as well, seething with the same slogans calling for revenge, often reinforced by the voice of guns. Yet the main enemy was in the south.
هم السبب فيما حدث في حرب فلسطين. انا اعرف ان الشعب العربي من كل بلد عربي راح وحارب ومات، وشفت بعيني العرب من كل بلد عربي، من سوريا ومن فلسطين ومن مصر ومن اليمن ومن السعودية ومن الأردن ومن العراق، من جميع البلاد العربية ومن لبنان، وكان معايا عرب من السودان ايضا بحربهم. شفت بعيني ازاي كل واحد منهم.
Nasser based his policy on hatred towards Israel. It was well publicized, as shown in this Egyptian film on training methods for the Fedayeen terrorists.
ويمارس المتطوعون مرانا خاصا على تطهير المنازل والأغراض العسكرية والهجوم على مواقع العدو وإبادته بالطرق والأساليب التي تدرس نظريا ويطبقونها عمليا. ويجري التدريب مع استعمال النيران والمتفجرات، ويقبل عليه المتطوعون من رجال المقاومة الشعبية، يدفعهم حماس صادق وإصرار على المقاومة المستميتة دفاعا عن حرية الوطن.
Acts of sabotage and terror increased towards the middle of the 50s. Israelis paid with blood and property for Nasser's ambition to be the Arab savior. While the United Nations observed, the tracks always led to the border. Israel's patience reached its limit. October the 29th, 1956, the Sinai Campaign. General Moshe Dayan, then Chief of Staff, announced that during the first week in November, the Egyptian army in Sinai was wiped out. Free passage was once again secured to and from Eilat, our port on the Red Sea. The latest Soviet weapons were of no avail. The Egyptian army was defeated. British and French forces also took part in an attempt to secure their rights in the Suez Canal. Nasser blocked it by sinking ships and blowing bridges. Heavy pressure was exercised on Israel by the United Nations, with Russia and the United States joining in, forcing Israel to retreat.
Suez Canal crisis time, taking into full consideration the sovereignty and the rights of Egypt and the interests of the users of the canal.
United Nations Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld came to the Middle East to implement the United Nations decision. He was followed by General Burns, commander of the UN Emergency Force. The UN forces were to act as barrier between Israeli and Egyptian forces. The United Nations took over Israeli army posts. The maritime powers guaranteed free navigation. The Suez Canal was open to all ships, except Israeli ships. Nasser turned defeat into victory. According to Egyptian newsreels, the Sinai campaign was an Egyptian success.
مصر صامدة أمام العدوان الغاشم تدافع حتى الموت عن أشرف قضية وأنبل غاية. وقفت ترد غارات الأعداء من البحر والبر والجو. ولقن الجنود البواسل الاستعمار والمستعمرين درسا لا ينسى. لقد كان دفاع المصريين دفاعا مستميتا جبارا لا يهزم ولا يقهر. وأصلت مدافعنا طائرات العدو نيرانا حامية حولت سماءنا إلى جحيم مستعر.
Egypt's political recovery was closely followed by renewed armament, with the anti-Israel slogan, "We are marching to Haifa, to Acre, to Jaffa." General Rabin, Israel's chief of staff, spoke of training methods.
שאנו יודעים נגד מי נילחם ובאיזה שטחים נילחם. וכך יכולנו...
The Israeli army enjoys the advantage of knowing the nature of his enemy and being familiar with the terrain. Consequently, we were able to develop means, doctrines, and methods of fighting. Our army has been training and studying during the last few years. There is no doubt that these methods proved themselves in June 1967. A special effort was centered on training and education of officers. The young cadets are assigned their mission, taking this fortified enemy objective so as to secure the passage for the battalion. The advance will be to the east, the attack from the south. The platoon will form up in the grove, fire bases will cover the attack, then a move forward to the fences, a break into the trenches in force, and organization for defense.
נעלה לכיוון מערב ונתקוף מכיוון דרום.
The course is completed. All branches of the defense forces are represented. These officers will lead their men with the cry that has become tradition for Israeli commanders. Not forward, but follow me. The Israel Defense Forces are never at a standstill. They must always increase their power to match that of the enemy. That was precisely our position before the Six-Day War. May the 15th, Egyptian forces on parade. They are pouring into Sinai. May the 16th, reserve forces are called up. The United Nations forces retreat to their camps. May the 17th, Syria and Egypt declare that they are ready for war. May the 18th, Radio Cairo declares the army in Sinai is ready. Egypt demands the UN's withdrawal. May the 19th, United Nations Secretary General U Thant orders UN forces to withdraw from Gaza, Sinai, and Sharm el Sheikh, yielding to the Egyptian demand. May the 22nd, Nasser blockades the Tiran Straits to all Israeli ships and cargoes. This, actually, was the first salvo which started the Six-Day War. Cairo boasted, let Eshkol carry out his threat. The Arab armies will answer him. The revolutionary Arab peoples will finally have the opportunity to destroy the Israelis. Israel mobilized. We got called up, so we said thanks. We thought that we'd have some fun. We got tasteless food and an Uzi gun. We were all of us back in the ranks. The army spokesman announced that in view of Egyptian troops massing on the Sinai border and the UN evacuation at Egypt's demand, the Israeli forces have taken all necessary measures to deal with the situation, including the mobilization of reserves. Cairo was explicit. Nasser, Nasser, we shall follow you. We shall destroy you, Israel. We shall grind the Israelis to dust. So, there we were, waiting. Reserves and recruits, soldiers on leave 11 months a year, men in their 20s, 30s, 40s, those who had never fought, those who had in Sinai, and in 1948, and in World War II. Civilians used pillowcases as sandbags. Urban buses headed for the front lines. We were back in the age of chivalry. Those who remained in the rear strove to keep up with their brothers in the front. Instant first aid courses, queuing up to donate blood, turning shelters into emergency hospitals, preparing for a war we did not want. In the Security Council, the Soviet delegate Fedorenko was determined to condemn Israel as the aggressor and called our alert war psychosis.
Правящие круги Израиля продолжали нагнетать обстановку.
Fedorenko was not supported by public opinion. All Jews everywhere and millions of others were deeply concerned over the danger threatening Israel. Prime Minister Eshkol says the latest events prove the threat behind Egypt's moves. He calls on all the nations to take every measure to preserve the peace. Diplomatic activity has stepped up to full steam ahead. Foreign Minister Abba Eban sets out for world capitals to explain Israel's position. May the 30th, Jordanian King Hussein signs a military pact with Nasser, putting Jordan's army under Egypt's command. The head of the Palestine Liberation Army, Ahmed Shukeri, calls for a jihad, a holy war. We shall slaughter you, we shall wipe you out, kill the Jews, wipe out Israel. We shall kill you. We shall wipe you out. We shall slaughter you. Their hatred was spelled out in destructive power. In Egypt alone, there were more than 250,000 soldiers, more than 1,100 armored troop carriers, hundreds of rocket launchers, 1,400 modern Soviet-made tanks, hundreds of Soviet-made Katyusha rocket launchers, thousands of heavy cannon and artillery, as well as deadly long-range missiles. The armies of Syria and Jordan, bristling with weapons and with aid promised by Iraq, Algeria, Kuwait, and other Arab countries, could field the same number of tanks and men, and several hundred more planes. Our army was patiently waiting. The war was inevitable. That was clear. The question was, when? Waiting is a hard task, especially for a citizen army. As much as the men try to keep themselves busy, they have time to wonder about their families back home, and time to worry about them.
יש בכוחנו לא רק לבלום תוקפנות, אלא גם להכריע את צבאות האויב על אדמתם הם. כל זה בתנאי שלא נשתעשע באשליות כי הסכנה חלפה או נחלשה.
The Chief of Staff, General Rabin, told his men, not only can we check them, but we can defeat them on their territory, as long as we do not delude ourselves that the danger is over, as long as we prove patient, alert, ready and willing. I know that this is not easy. The mental effort demanded of a soldier who has to wait in tension is as great as that demanded in actual battle.
נצר מחכה לרבין, איי איי איי, נצר מחכה לרבין, איי איי איי, פעמיים כבר חיכה, איי איי איי, והכנסנו לדפיקה, איי.
Days and nights on the alert, not a single day wasted. The army gains power from day to day, while on the political front, statesmen still seek formulae. The Arab propaganda machines still blare hymns of hate and destruction, and Israel's general staff and field commanders seek to perfect the fighting force at their disposal. The defense forces are like a coiled spring, ready to cut loose, if there should prove to be no choice. Nasser and his deputy, Marshal Amer, visit their pilots in Bir Gafkafa in Sinai. Nasser says, if the Jews want war, we say welcome. We are ready for war. The Jews will not hold out for more than 2 hours. On June the 1st, a national unity government is formed. 3 new ministers take their places. Party differences are dropped. The defense forces are ready. The new Minister of Defense, Moshe Dayan, addresses the foreign press.
For them to, with their superiority of numbers, to take Tel Aviv.
Time is running out. The whole nation waits. Tel Aviv waits for the first air raid siren. June the 5th, 1967.
המשימה, תקיפת שדות תעופה במצרים, מטרות הטייסת, קהיר מערב ואינשאס.
Mission: to attack Egyptian airfields. Targets: Cairo West and Inshas airfields. Method of attack: fly low in battle formation over the sea in groups of 4. First bomb, then strafe. Spot the planes, mark their location, attack for maximum results. Return home on minimum fuel. Destroy enemy aircraft also in the air. Any questions?
איך להתייחס לתותחי הנ"מ בזמן ביצוע התקיפה? ברור, אנחנו נתעלם בתקיפה מאש הנ"מ. בכל מקרה יש להשלים ולבצע...
Ignore attack fire until the mission is carried out completely and according to plan.
אורי?
מה קורה אם נפגשים במטוסי אויב?
Engage enemy aircraft only after the mission is completed. Then engage them and destroy them in the air. And good luck.
בהצלחה.
Flying low over the sea, in complete radio silence, Israeli Air Force pilots were out to repel the Egyptian attack. General Gavish, chief of the Southern Command, tells about his front. On June the 5th, as usual, I was in my command post in my half-track. The Chief of Staff ordered me to start a counterattack immediately. For me, it was the greatest moment. After 3 weeks of alert, weeks of waiting and tension, preparing for the Egyptian attack. At 8:15, my division commanders reported ready to move. And at 8:15, I saw the cloud of dust raised by the armored columns, moving out to their respective missions. The Israel Air Force destroyed airfields as far as Luxor in the south. Pilots carried out their missions in full, destroying aircraft and takeoff strips. 300 Egyptian planes were destroyed on the morning of the first day. General Hod, commander of the Israel Air Force, explains. On the eve of June the 5th, the Arab air forces were deployed as follows. In Egypt, 3 main groups. One in Sinai, another in the Canal Zone, the third near Cairo along the Nile. All in all, 18 airfields. Jordan had 2 airfields near Amman, Syria 5 airfields near Damascus. A total of 650 fighters and bombers, 100 of which were bombers, the rest fighter bombers, such as MiG-21s, MiG-19s, Sukhoi 7s, MiG-17s. General Gavish continues his story. I had 3 divisions, one under the command of General Tal, one under the command of General Sharon, the third under General Yaffe. A briefing before the breakthrough. We are inferior in force, but if we surround the enemy and attack wherever we find him, no matter the odds, we shall break him. Good luck, that's all. The paratroopers were on their way. The battle for Rafiq began. Tanks went into action, their hatches open, their commanders half exposed to enemy fire. Our men came under fire from artillery, concealed tanks, and from highly fortified positions. This was a most striking example of man and machine in a powerful combination. The armored force broke through, the infantry followed to clear the trenches. The first encounter in battle can be decisive for the war as a whole. We did our utmost to win in this battle. 10 years had passed since we fought them. They had had time to learn from the Russians, to improve their leadership, to employ new weapons. If we could break through Rafiq and El Arish, the Egyptian northern defense line would collapse. We did break through, and we transferred the battle to enemy territory, to the outskirts of Rafiq. General Gavish continues his account. Tal's division captured Khan Yunis, attacked Rafiq, and hurried to El Arish, moving in 2 columns. One armored force, one force of mounted paratroopers and tanks, which attacked the Egyptian 7th Division from the south in order to destroy the first lines. It fought desperately to break through areas defended by scores of tanks, anti-tank guns and artillery. Casualties were considerable, but by bashing our heads against the wall, we kept advancing with our best forces leading. We reached, attacked, and took El Arish on time. Now, as in previous battles, our soldiers knew that in this army, the wounded are never left behind. They all knew that if they were hit, their comrades would not desert them. The amazing bravery of medics and doctors earned many of them citations. Remnants of the Egyptian Air Force were hit or chased away by our AK teams. Not all were destroyed on the ground. A few tried to challenge our aircraft, but here too our pilots proved their superiority in dogfights in the air. Scores of aircraft were hit in the air. Syrian, Jordanian, and Iraqi airfields were destroyed after their planes and forces attacked us. We had complete air superiority. After the capture of the Sinai bases at El Arish and Bir Gafkafa, Egyptian operation orders were found, indicating enemy plans and alertness prior to the 5th of June. From these documents, it was clear that the Egyptian army was about to attack Israeli airfields. Air Force Commander Hod adds, populated areas such as Beersheba, Tel Aviv, Haifa, Netanya were also targets. Their aim was clear. The Israel Air Force had strict orders to keep clear of all population centers. The Navy commander, Commodore Arel, takes up the story. On June the 5th, we sent the best of our men with our best equipment to the main bases of the enemy, Port Said and Alexandria, the base of the main Egyptian fleet. Most of its units in this area were concentrated in this base, guarding Egypt's harbors. The base was defended by a series of obstacles and by ships and planes. Our men broke through all these, penetrated into the base, and inflicted considerable damage. Meanwhile, on land, the brigade which was to take the Gaza Strip, having taken Khan Yunis, entered the Strip by 11 a.m. and turned towards Gaza. There it met with heavy resistance from the whole 20th Egyptian Division and suffered heavy casualties. They did not take the city on that day and had to put it off till noon the following day. Along the central axis, Sharon's men were advancing since the morning towards Abu Agela, according to a very complicated plan and moving under heavy artillery fire. One armored force took to the road. A smaller force outflanked the enemy to reach Abu Agela from the rear. Infantry attacked Kataf at night to raid the trenches. Helicopter-borne paratroopers landed behind the lines in darkness and advanced on foot, attacking artillery positions from the rear. By 4 o'clock the following morning, the battle was won. 4,000 Egyptian soldiers, 80 tanks, 60 artillery pieces were already out of action. We had relatively few casualties considering the highly complicated plan. This was a night flank attack which aimed to cause total collapse by attacking the enemy from all directions. Having destroyed enemy airfields, the Air Force was now free to support land forces and attack enemy convoys. The Fugas, training planes modified for the purpose, hit masses of vehicles with great accuracy. The success of the Air Force was largely due to the ground crew's ability and initiative. Not many air forces can boast of such unusually fast refueling and ground services. The armored columns had to keep moving, to establish contact with enemy armor and to encircle a force of 600 tanks. That, in fact, was the main problem. There were two ways of destroying the Egyptian army: either confront it openly and engage in open battle, or surround it and force their armor to try and break through our ring. It was the second way that was chosen, and we were ready for them. We got there 90 minutes before they tried to break out.
קרב השריון הגדול שנמשך לילה ויום הסתיים בסופו של דבר.
General Gavish continues. The armored battle went on all through that night, and the next day on the Be'er Gafkafa-Mitla Nachal line. The final result was an almost total destruction of the enemy's armored force. Its remnants lay along all the roads, particularly along the Mitla Pass. Trucks by the thousand, tanks by the hundred, guns and arms of all kinds. Mile after mile of burned-out equipment, trapped in a deadly bottleneck. General Tal, the Armored Corps commander, takes up the narrative. Our armored forces transferred the war deep into enemy territory, thus totally upsetting and overthrowing the operational balance of the enemy. Not always, and not every armored force can achieve as successfully an attack of this kind, which demands an extremely fast penetration deep into enemy territory. Such an operation requires good soldiers, and we happen to have them. These men never hesitated, never stopped the momentum of battle, whether the flanks were exposed or the rear yet uncleared. These qualities allowed our force to perform one of the classic moves in the history of war. It is this that explains the rapid victory. By 1 o'clock on Friday morning, the eastern bank of the Suez Canal and the Gulf of Tiran were in Israeli hands. Some felt like a dip in the water. For others, there were other pastimes. Egyptian towns now suddenly became frontier positions. In the Mediterranean, enemy activity at sea was limited to the dispatch of 3 submarines ordered to attack ships off our coasts. We spotted all 3 of them while still far from the coast, and before they reached any objective. They were all attacked and all retreated without accomplishing their mission. Another naval force operated in the Port Said area so as to prevent further activity. It engaged the enemy guarding the harbor. It was the Navy who beat the paratroopers in the race to Sharm el Sheikh. By Wednesday, the Gulf of Tiran was open again to all shipping. The guns threatening the passage were no longer fit for action. All of Sinai was in Israel hands. Israel did not want revenge. She felt no hatred. She only wished to live in peace. Israel never asked for this war, but she was forced to fight it on several fronts. Israel wanted no vengeance, and she sent her prisoners back home across the canal to Egypt. But Sinai was not the whole story, as General Narkis, the commander of the Jordanian front, can tell. On Monday morning, June the 5th, our forces were posted along the border. By 10:45, the Jordanians opened fire all along the border, particularly in Jerusalem. The Jordanian Air Force bombed Netanya and Kfar Saba. Jerusalem was being heavily shelled whilst Parliament assembled to swear in the new government of national unity. Soon the first civilian casualties were arriving at the hospitals. As the United Nations headquarters was captured by the Jordanian army, we decided to move. One armored brigade was ordered to start up Mount Castle and advance to the radar hill in Ramallah. The Jerusalem brigade was ordered to retake the United Nations headquarters so as to remove the pressure. The Har El Brigade took the Bab el-Wad path to fight once again the Jordanian outposts, where so many of our men were killed during the War of Independence in 1948. The battle area was familiar to the men. Bidu, Nebi Samuel, the radar hill. It was rocky, craggy terrain. The armor had to break through fortifications and minefields, as well as to repel Jordanian tanks brought up to the front. The night battle was fought by the light of searchlights on the tanks. Bidu, the radar, Nebi Samuel were taken. The road to Ramallah and Calandria and northern Jerusalem was open. A particularly dangerous spot in Israel was the coastal strip opposite Qalqilia and Tulkarm, a width of only 12 miles. It was clear that the enemy would try to cut the country in half at this spot. On June the 6th, at noon, our infantry broke through from the west, aiming to take Qalqilia and to proceed east. The next day, another force joined in, took Tulkarem and moved on to Nablus. The armored forces were turning now north of Jerusalem. The Elias sector was Jordan's last stronghold in the vicinity of the capital, a strong fortified position. To take it, the infantry were closely supported by air power. In all the battles, on all the fronts, barbed wire and mines barred the way, and they had to be cleared. A job both dangerous and demanding. No sapper can afford to be mistaken twice. Elias fell on June the 7th at noon. Jerusalem was divided 19 years ago, and for 19 years no Jews were allowed to worship at its holy sites. For 19 years, border sectors were exposed to Jordanian snipers. For 19 years, the city of peace was divided by walls and by barbed wire. The harshest battle of Jerusalem began at the police academy and the fortifications known as Ammunition Hill. The academy was fitted out by the Jordanians as an indomitable stronghold. Indomitable? Well, almost indomitable.
נכנסנו דרך הטרשים לשדה האש והמוקשים של גבעת התחמושת.
היה אז בוקר היום השני למלחמה בירושלים. האופק החביר במזרח. היינו בעיצומו של הקרב על גבעת התחמושת. לחמנו שם מזה 3 שעות. התנהל קרב עקשני, קטלני. הירדנים נלחמו בעקשנות. זה היה יעד מבוצר בצורה בלתי רגילה.
באותו רגע נזרק רימון מבחוץ. בנס לא נפגענו. חששתי שהירדנים יזרקו רימונים נוספים. מישהו היה צריך לעלות למעלה ולהשגיח. לא היה לי זמן לשאול מי מתנדב. שלחתי את איתן. איתן לא היסס לרגע. עלה למעלה והתחיל להפעיל את המקלעון. לפעמים היה עובר אותי, והייתי צריך לצעוק לו שישאר בקו שלי. ככה עברנו איזה 30 מטר. איתן היה מחפה מלמעלה, ואנחנו טיהרנו את הבונקרים מבפנים. עד שנפגע בראשו ונפל פנימה.
ירדנו אל התעלות, אל הכוכים והמסילות, ואל המגבילות של בקעת התחמושת. ואיש הענה לא שאל, מי שהלך ראשון נפל, צריך היה הרבה מזל. על בקעת התחמושת אולי היינו אריות, אך מי שעוד רצה לחיות, אסור היה לא להיות. על בקעת התחמושת.
להם הייתה שיטה. קודם זרקו רימון, אחר כך ירו צרור, אחר כך נחו. החלטנו לנסות לפוצץ את הבונקר שלהם בבזוקה. הבזוקה עשתה כמה שריטות לבטון. החלטנו לנסות בחומר הנפץ. חיכיתי מעליהם עד שחזר הבחור עם חומר הנפץ. הוא היה זורק לי את החבילות ואני הייתי מניח את חומר הנפץ בפתח הבונקר שלהם. אז בין צרור לרימון הייתי ניגש לפתח הבונקר שלהם ושם שם את חומר הנפץ. הפעלתי את חומר הנפץ והתרחקתי כמה שיכולתי. היו לי 4 מטר לתמרן כי גם מאחורי היו לי גיונרים. לא יודע למה קיבלתי צלש. בסך הכל רציתי להגיע הביתה בשלום.
7:20 אל בית הספר לשוטרים, אספו את כל הנשארים מגבעת התחמושת.
The fighting was deadly. The men moved on. Night turned into day. Many were killed. The Jordanian snipers were thorough. Dozens of enemy positions fired simultaneously. For 4 hours the battle raged. Each trench and bunker had to be taken. They fought from house to house. The paratroopers knew that here they had to move as fast as possible in order not to waste lives. Snipers awaited them behind windows, behind stone walls, behind camouflaged firing posts. 2 additional paratroop battalions advanced in 2 directions. One moved to Wadi Yuseh, the second towards the Mendelbaum Gate. A camouflaged firing post, which brings down every man who tries to break through. Mandelbaum Gate and its vicinity were taken. The next objectives were the Damascus Gate and the Rockefeller Museum. The Rockefeller Museum, facing the old city. Just 20 yards from here, the old city walls. Down goes the flag under Jordanian fire from guns posted all along the walls. The warriors may rest, but not their commanders. The second phase of the battle is planned. Officers are briefed on objectives and routes of advance to complete the ring encircling the old city. At Abu Tor, a southern quarter of the city, our positions were higher. The fighting was fierce nevertheless. Tanks covered us from the United Nations building. Infantry broke through from the east in house-to-house fighting. General Narkis tells of the battle's climax. On Wednesday morning, the third day of the war, the historical mission was completed. Paratroopers, moving with artillery and air support, captured the surrounding hills, the Victoria Augusta compound, the Mount of Olives, and reached the hills dominating Jerusalem, which were now totally in our hands. Three battalions went down to the valley of Gethsemane, and from there to the Lion's Gate to break through into the old city of Jerusalem. The orders were to use no heavy armor in the old city. We knew it meant more casualties, but this was no place for destruction. The Temple Mount was ours. The men ran through the alleys, searching for a 2,000-year-old stone wall. The Wall of Tears, the Temple's western wall. Jewish history unfolded. King David, King Solomon, Ezra, Nehemiah, Judah the Maccabee, the Zealots, and the paratroopers, the Israel Defense Forces. The nation and the world were caught up by the drama of the wall's liberation. Jerusalem, the golden, with its problems, its population, its various religions and sects. Our Jerusalem, with its ancient history, the city of King David. The forces began moving south, on to the Etzion area. Etzion was captured in 1948 by the Jordanians in a scene of wholesale slaughter. All of its defenders were killed or captured. Many of those now liberating it fought there 20 years ago, or knew the men who died defending the village. Although Etzion was no more, its memory had lived on. Now, by the shortest route southwards on to Hebron, we anticipated heavy fighting, but Hebron surrendered without a shot. It was here in Hebron that in 1929, the local population massacred dozens of Jews, men, women, and children. For centuries, Jews had been forbidden to enter the tombs of the patriarchs at Hebron, forbidden to ascend higher than the seventh step. When one fights away from home, war is quite different. But in this war, soldiers and civilians knew that rear and front were inseparable. This was felt by all, by the youngsters and the older men who were not called up, by the housewives. Communication between rear and front. Just tell them I'm all right. As the war had raged from its outset against Egypt in the south and Jordan to the east, the Syrians in the north had opened up heavy artillery, mortar and machine gun fire against Israeli farms and villages in northern Galilee. These settlements had for 20 years been ceaselessly harassed by Syrian firing from the heights down into the valley, and heavy casualties and severe damage had been caused. For the first 3 days of the June War, the Syrians were answered with Israeli artillery and airstrikes. Their sorties into the valley were repulsed. On the fourth day of the war, the Israel Defense Forces began to move in the north. General Elazar, chief of the Northern Command, outlines the events. This is a mountainous area, rocky, craggy terrain. There are few roads for advance, and it's difficult to open new ones. The Syrians prepared this area during the last 20 years, following Soviet defense doctrines. They built several defense lines, each with long, deep trenches with overhead covers, concrete outposts, concrete shelters, incredible numbers of mines encircled by double apron fences. It was a perfectly fortified defense line. These heights completely dominated our territory. They dominated our settlements, and they dominated all the roads leading up to the heights. In fact, they dominated any possible locality where we could concentrate an attacking force. In military terms, this is considered an extremely tough mission, bound to cause heavy casualties. Our mission was to take the heights, to take them quickly, and to take them with as few casualties as possible. Syria was at war with Israel before the Six-Day War. The settlements were under constant threat. Disregarding the armistice, the Syrians often damaged the fields, and the settlements were constantly shelled by Syrian artillery fire. Our patrol units were never safe. The Syrians diverted the Jordan River waters and reached the peak of aggression when they sent terrorists and saboteurs into Israel. With Syrian fire continuing, on June the 9th, orders were given to attack the Syrian heights. It was a small force that stood ready. The plan was based on an attack looking like a wide frontal attack, whilst the main effort would actually concentrate on one breakthrough from north of Kfar Sold to establish a bridgehead on the heights, and from there carry on with the attack. We crossed the border at 11:30 a.m. The main thrust consisted of armored forces and infantry. A secondary effort was planned to open a new passage uphill and give the impression of a wide front. This force was to go up from Gonen. The third wave would take hold of the first outposts, thus maintaining the appearance of a wide front. The attack was carried out with heavy fighting against Syrian objectives. The armored force went up first, advanced to Kar and Zaura, was engaged by enemy tanks, fought against anti-tank guns, took fortified defense lines, and established a bridgehead on the heights. In order to save lives, and despite the craggy terrain, tanks were sent forward. Civilian bulldozers went up as well, often preceding the tanks to open passages up the hills. The battle was hard and fierce, but fighting momentum never slackened. crews left their damaged tanks and fought on as infantry, all the while advancing upwards and onwards, inch by inch. The attack was based on tanks breaking through with air support, the infantry following up behind. This made the attack faster and fiercer and saved many lives. The infantry had the important role of fighting in the outposts, of fighting in the trenches and the bunkers, of mopping up the enemy to the last. The infantry widened the gap by taking Tel Azaziat and Tel Fakhar. The fighting in Tel Fakhar was fierce. There were many casualties during 3 hours of fighting in the trenches. This was a day to hear the whining shells of mortars, to seek and find the strength to breathe, to find the strength to tear oneself from the shelter of the pits and rocks, to climb bare hills, the strength to withstand fire by day and by dark night, the strength to crawl beneath barbed wire, step over traps and mines, to storm the concrete trenches, never stopping despite grenades, never stopping despite 1,000 bullets, going on, and never counting who was left of one's companions. By 2:30 that afternoon, Quneitra had fallen. Mission completed. We captured the line from Mount Hermon to Quneitra and down to the old border. The mission was completed in 27 hours. The Golan Heights were in our hands.
המשימה הושגה תוך 27 שעות.
Syria, our most fanatic and hostile foe, was defeated. Our Galilee villages could breathe again.
בידינו היה גם חלק ניכר מן הנשק הסובייטי אשר סופק לסוריה בנדיבות לב כה רבה. המלחמה נגמרה, עכשיו שקט. נשתתקו קולות הירי ומכונת המלחמה שותקת. התותחים אילמים, המנועים קרים. הטנקים מוטלים מרוסקי עברים. חסרי אונים רובצים הם כמו פגרי פלדה. הנה גבהות דמשק, הנה גאון ירדן, הנה מצרים והודה. את בשר מרכבותיהם אוכלת חלודה. הנה הוא עמק השלל, הנה הן מפלצות הפלא. בן אדם, בן אדם, לא תחיינה עוד העצמות האלה. המלחמה נגמרה ואנחנו נחים, אך בשנתנו הכבדה עוד רועמים התותחים, וענני האש את הטנקים מלחכים, ונופלים פגזים ובורות באדמה נפתחים. בשנתנו הכבדה עוד שורקים הכדורים בתעלות בין הדיונות מאשנבי הביצורים, ואנחנו עדיין עולים ואנחנו אל הקרב ממהרים, ומבעד לעפעפנו השמיים בוערים. בשנתנו הכבדה אנו רצים על החולות ומדלגים על הסלעים, נערים בני 20 וגברים בני 40. גרוננו ניחר, נשקנו לוהט ובגדנו קרעים. והנה, הנה אל סוף המלחמה אנו באים. והמלחמה נגמרה ואנחנו עדיין חיים. המלחמה נגמרה. המלחמה נגמרה ואיננה. המלחמה נגמרה, רק אחי לא חזר ממנה. אבל אני רואה אותו מביט אליי מתוך האש. אני שומע את קולו בגחלים לוחש. אני מרגיש את חום נשימתו האחרונה. אחי, אחי הטוב אשר פרח כמו יונה אל ארץ רחוקה ויפה ובהירה, אל ארץ שתישאר לנצח צעירה. אחי, אחי הטוב, המלחמה נגמרה. המלחמה נגמרה ורק הדיה חוזרים ועולים ממבטי האנשים ומטחי הכבוד לזכר הנופלים, ומראות הלוחמים שבאותם הימים הגדולים. המלחמה נגמרה ואנחנו הולכים ושבים אל בתינו. אנחנו הלוחמים החיים, הנושאים בלבבות את מתינו. אנחנו הולכים והמדים עוד בוערים מתחת לחולצה הלבנה. המלחמה נגמרה. מי ייתן ותהיה זו המלחמה האחרונה.
נלחמנו במלחמה הזו בעת ובעונה אחת נגד כל צבאות ערב. נלחמנו במלחמה הזו לבד, ואם נדע גם בעתיד להתכונן לא פחות טוב מכפי שהתכוננו בעבר, ולקיים הישגים שהשגנו בידינו, אנחנו יכולים להסתכל אל העתיד תוך ביטחון ואמונה.